Hey there, rulers. Welcome back to Ruler School. It's time for a showdown with Patrick Ogrentz and his Aimul List versus myself playing the new Reflect and Refrain tag combination. Let's go ahead and jump right in. This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, CCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for product, and FowlLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists, as well as our guest lecturer members Vite Ramen, King Pearlshine, and Mognite. Class is in session. Okay, rulers, so here we are getting in, partnered with Patrick Ogrentz on the left with Diversity Aimul, the whole idea being we're going to flip Aimul a lot of different times and use some of the new tools to be able to help fix what we're going to be flipping into with like the 4C stones and other old cards to kind of be able to do that 4C manipulation and flip into some cool cards. We are also still playing Diversity Palace and Zeus Atlas as a way to help kind of finish the game off that way as well. And on the right, I am playing the new Reflect and Refrain tag rulers. So keep in mind that we've said before with these contracts that we are specifically running max 2 copies of each of the contracts to kind of say like, hey, you just pulled the ruler, you maybe want to spend a little bit more just to try it with a little bit more contracting, but you can see kind of exactly how this deck operates or how the deck functions with only being able to get 1, because the rulers themselves are still very, very fun to play and very, very capable of functioning very well, even with just 1 contract. So 1 or 2 contracts. So let's go ahead and jump in here. I am going to believe Patrick is going to be on the draw, which is not necessarily bad for him. It does, I mean, obviously the optimum is for him to go first to play something like Flute so he can have access to, or any kind of mana dork in Aimul's traditional sense, to be able to recover twice and kind of have that extra will on my turn. But it also just means, you know, it's one less kind of situation for him to, or he has to essentially wait for 2 of my turns to be able to start flipping Aimul, or 3 of my turns potentially to be able to start flipping Aimul to really have any kind of responsiveness to support the plays, which can be a little bit of a problem. So beginning of the game, we're going to reveal Rogue Spectator. Rogue Spectator is here specifically because you always want a way to be able to have your Reflect contract that you can use it. And so without having to rely on your opponent as much, Rogue Spectator is a great way to set that up. We're going to go ahead and use Mastery here for Wanderer's Castle to start that mana counter generation, or magic counter generation, which is great. And we're going to follow it up with a Magical Power Piggy Bank, also a wonderful card. A couple of additions here to kind of get things started and really start ramping up those counters. Kind of the ideal thresholds for magical counters for Reflect and Refrain are 3 and then 7. 3 is when a lot of their effects start to get kind of cost reductions or things of that nature, and 7 is when they get their kind of more devastating effects. We're seeing a life-stealing altar come down from Patrick on turn 1. A lot of additions being played by both sides here. Before recovery, we're going to go ahead and get a counter on Piggy Bank and a counter on Refrain. Hitting that 4C stone, and then probably just going to throw it out with a pass. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of Reflect and Refrain's past resonators are quick cast, and so as the green-white control deck, you're probably mostly going to play on your opponent's turn anyway to support things that way. Keeping in mind that Refrain is the one that when contracted supports things on your opponent's, or does things on your opponent's side turn, and Reflect is the one that builds counters for your turn. Because we saw that life-stealing altar, we are actually going to see a judgment here from Patrick. I don't have any response to that. Patrick thrown off that beautiful 10th anniversary collection Aimul. And the reason why is because this life-stealing altar is then going to invert and get us a stone. So it comes into play tapped, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it becomes soul returning altar, and it means that he's not going to at least miss his stone call for this turn. It just comes into the field rested. And then we also get the added value of the Aimul in terms of what it's going to hit off the top. And nicely here, he can even kind of peek using the 4C stone to ship kind of, hey, I really don't want to see that card. I wouldn't be able to cast it with Aimul anyway. And let's see what our best 3 choices are off of the Aimul to be able to cheat into play. Unfortunately, not being able to see everything there, it looks like his only possible target was Valentina, owner of the theater, which is not great. This is not super helpful for him. I don't have any resonators on the field, so it's just a 6/10 body at this point in time. Taking advantage of this kind of tapped out field to be able to try and put in some pressure, we're going to tap Magical Piggy Bank to get some counters, and then banish it to move those counters to Reflect and shoot his Valentina for 1,000 damage. Now we're up to 3 counters, and because we hit that 3 counters, we can then pay 1 to play Magical Rabbit. One of the best cards in the deck, in my opinion. Magical Rabbit, at least for the way we're playing it, is going to then be an 8/8, comes into play for 1, quick cast, shoots the Aimul, gets her killed, and then drains me 8 life and has a pressure body for the next turn, especially since we're going to get at least 1 more magical counter off the top before we go into next turn anyway. Because we can tap the Wanderer's Castle as well. Down we see a Dark Alice during recovery, just to kind of help filter through any kind of a quick cast draw speed. Draw power is helpful with these decks that we're playing fewer copies of the contract with. The other thing to note about Reflect and Refrain is they have a quick cast spell that can just search up the contracts, which is very nice. So we're going to go ahead and banish the Dark Alice to its own effect, get an extra counter off of Magical Wanderer's Castle, being now we have a 10/10 Magical Rabbit that's going to be swinging in with that drain, which is super helpful. Swing in for 10. Patrick says, I have to take that. Takes 30. Drain up to 5,800. And at that point in time, we're probably shipping turn. Now, you notice that there is the red there in the stone base. Not only is it for Rogue Spectator in the main board, but there are some cards that we play in the sideboard that require red. The nice thing about it is, in general, is the base color for this deck is pretty much green, and we can shift a lot of stuff to be primarily green. So green-white is the kind of green comes first, and then white comes later, especially if you're going like a Reflect contract into a Refrain contract. Hitting a heat magic. I think it's Fire Moon Fragment. I gotta try to remember each of the moon fragments at this point in time to kind of, again, cover our bases there. Now, the reason why we can't Judgment here again is because we would just be tapping out Aimul to kind of hope for the best, because we're not going to get another stone off of Soul Returning Altar. We have to play Life-Giving Altar first. So we're just going to pass the turn there, it looks like. Oh no, does decide to go in for a play here. Makes sense. He cannot allow this rabbit to just keep beating him down, especially since it has the drain, and it's only going to get bigger. So we see a Guardian Dragon come down. Let's see here. Let's go for a Cheshire Cat here, coming down to, again, sculpt that hand for a potential next turn flip. He does get to draw 2, put 1 back, so eventually he's going to get this card back in his hand anyway. But there might have been a card that he doesn't mind shuffling away because of Cheshire Cat getting killed. Cheshire Cat is a nice card here to be able to block the Magical Rabbit. It doesn't have flying. There's no way for me to spot remove it out of the way. So it is just going to serve as a protection from that card for the turn. Tapping for another magical counter here, go up to 5. Casting using the Phoenix to go up to 6 counters. Casting Dark Alice here to discard Light of Megiddo and banishing the Dark Alice again. And then we may only have a green redstone, but again, the nice part about is these contracts for Reflect and Refrain is that can be paid for with mastery of Reflect and Refrain. So we can still leave open support here, and we can actually go into launch of Megiddo contracting here in the recovery phase, which is pretty great. Now, Secret of Worlds comes out. There is no sequence where we get to save that Wanderer's Castle. It's not a trigger. It's just kind of part of rules process. You have to banish this card. So that just goes away. But we are still sitting on 6 counters, which is pretty good. And we're setting ourselves up to really kind of be able to control the game kind of from here on out is the hope. He does have the advantage. Patrick does have the advantage here of like the Aimul flip is going to be very good for him, particularly because he'll be able to get additional things that doesn't revolve like casting. And so Reflect and Refrain being able to counter stuff really doesn't matter if it's just like abilities. Keep in mind that we do have access to something like the great unleashing of magical power, or the full the marble rare that I can't remember its name, to be able to cancel all of those abilities potentially, but it is a heavy cost just to stop like a trigger from an Aimul that'll just keep coming back. We did play a proactive Windia here, which is to help us kind of mitigate the Guardian Dragon. One thing to note about in this matchup is like Aimul's going to fly, so we can, you know, if Aimul gets too big, Windia can help us deal with that. We don't have a flyer, we have no flyer to be able to answer the Guardian Dragon, but we can pop it with Refrain if we need to. The biggest piece here is not killing his Aimul for him, because that's the one way that Patrick is going to be generating the most value. And so it is going to be kind of a weird stalemate until we can find something to be able to mess with the Aimul in a way that prevents us from getting blown out. Or I guess I should say not even blown out, in just a way that prevents that progressive value from becoming too much. Does look like we're going to see another Judgment of an Aimul here, potentially. Keeping in mind that Amadeus Holy Crystal is a 5-color stone because I control 2 J/rulers. Here comes the flip. And the trigger from Aimul, let's see what we get here. It is currently a 5/5 because he does control a single inverts. And it does look like we're going to hit a Diversity Palace, which is going to give the Dragon Drain, as well as both of them +1/+1, or as well as the Dragon +1/+1, because he controls a single Resonator of a single race. Just kind of verifying exactly how the pumps go. So it's all Resonator driven for Light Palace. And we're probably going to see a pass. I mean, I suppose there's not even really a world where you should swing with this Guardian Dragon, because of the Windia, and it leaves you vulnerable to being swing at. But he also probably knows that he might as well. No, I do think in the long scale of things that I probably wouldn't swing here, because there's no way I'm going to let it resolve damage, and it leaves him open a blocker, a second flying blocker. A lot of cards in Patrick's hand. Still got some goodwill to be able to respond to some things. He does have, looks like, Dragon of Megiddo. That could be really good this next turn, to flash in, kill his own Soul Returning Altar, get a stone, and then have another body. He does go to swing in here, which is very interesting. Windy is just going to tell the Dragon, ping it for 200 damage, and he just like can't deal any damage to me, which is totally fine. And we do see playing a flute by using the Diversity Palette Crystal, which I think was the wrong play here, because he's still able to play Dragon of Megiddo here, potentially. And then we do see a pass. At the end of turn, we're going to go ahead and see that magical storm, this is what I've talked about before that really helps with Reflect and Refrain. If you don't have, you can play, if you only have one copy of each of the contracts, you can play 4 copies of Wanderer's Magical Storm, and these just become additional copies of the contracts. And you can say like, oh, well, how do I recycle them if they get canceled or something like that? I've honestly also been playing Horn of the Sacred Beast in the deck as well, as a way to like cast Wanderer's Magical Storm in response, shuffle your deck back, graveyard back into your deck to put those 2 contracts back and grab them again. They're honestly very, very easy to recycle in that regard. So Patrick's in a pretty good spot with that, being able to do Dragon of Megiddo. Draws for turn, move to recovery. We do have contracts now for Reflect, so we're in a position where we are probably going to get to be able to go for the Reflect contract at this point in time. We have enough will to still be able to make some plays. Calling Stone with Mover of Worlds, and the main reason to do that is so that we have access to being able to pay for, we can pay for Recorder of Worlds, Memory of Worlds, using Reflect because of the mastery there. Casting the Rogue Spectator here, holding priority, foolishly not using the mastery of Reflect, just poor execution on my part. There's no reason to not. To try to cancel my own Rogue Spectator, or sorry, move my own Rogue Spectator from the field to the RFG and then successfully contract. The other reason why is I'm probably going to go ahead. I'm not swinging this turn. I can't imagine I'm swinging this turn, but going to go ahead and go for the mastery, or use Reflect's ability to recover Refrain, so that I can get a magic counter, go up to 7 and be in a good spot. We do see in response to the contract a absorbing knowledge, which is very interesting. It's asking to read Reflect here, Recorder of Worlds, to see his modes. Again, his 3 modes are that I can put a counter on once per turn during my turn, give something +6/+6 Eternal and Barrier, or draw a card, or recover an entity. So that can be a J Ruler, it can be a Stone, it can be an Addition, it can be a J Resonator, whatever it is, I can recover it. And so this works really nicely for like calling Stone with Mover, contracting Reflect to turn into Recorder, and then recovering Mover to set myself up for as well. Using Aimul's ability here to float 2 white will off of this flute to go ahead and cast Dance of Spirits, just to stop me from casting anything else this turn. I don't know what the thought was if I was somehow going to, I don't really know if I was going to take any other casting of any spells this turn. I can still use the abilities, and again, Recorder of Worlds just lets me recover. I'm probably not going to swing. I could swing with the Windia here, but ultimately I just like leaving my board pretty protected, because I'm just going to try to kill him next turn. So I let him draw, and then before recovery, we're going to go ahead and do complete rejection of the Wanderer Twins, to just kind of kill everything on his board that's not an addition. It keeps the stones. One thing that's to note here is that, like, I think if Patrick had not gone for that line, he could have just done Dragon of Megiddo and been 1 more stone up here. He's going to try to use the addition to sacrifice his 2 resonators to try to kill Windia. Windia's just going to bounce herself back. And so, like, you might think that's not a lot because I would just complete rejection and kill it anyway. But at the same time, he'd have 6, he'd be at 5 stones here, which sets him up to potentially make some pretty good plays. You see a Lancelot. Lancelot's pretty good here. It seems probably like it's a play to follow up with by having Aimul flipped, so you have an easy way to get rid of a powerful resonator. Gonna see the Judgment once again from the Aimul. And seeing what we hit into here. There's a lot of good hits. Something like Oof, unfortunately, looks like we didn't actually whiffed on that, which is really unfortunate. Anything, it grabs anything 3 or less, so we could grab something like Diversity at Zeus Alice, which would immediately come in and be every single race because of Diversity Palace, getting that huge buff, which doesn't super help it unless he had some way to give, you know, his ruler barrier, because I can just use Reflect to kill it. Or use Refrain to kill it, but it is still at least probably one of his best outs, which is why we're trying to go for it here. He's going to use Campanella, the Milky Way Moon, to try to go get a water moon card from the deck, which is Diversity Alice. And so we're just going to go ahead and say, you know what, in response, we're going to do Wings of Refrain. We're up to 7 counters. We're going to draw a card. We can't take any damage this turn, even if you do successfully get it. And then we're going to go ahead and cancel that using Reflects. So we're going to go to 7 counters, get this to resolve, and then we're just going to actually use Memory of Worlds here to remove it from the game and say you can cast it again. It's totally fine, just not right now because you don't have the will for it. Keep in mind that this card was errated to say the first mode is remove target spell from the game. The owner may play it without as if it was in their hand until the end of the game. Like, they can keep it for forever. And then we have a second Magical Rabbit coming down here for killing the Aimul, at which point in time he's tapped out, and that's going to be lethal. A crackback on my turn. So going into game 2 here, he does put me on the draw, which is, again, what we want to see from him to get that turn 1 mana dork. Goes into turn 2, or turn 1.5, having 2 extra will, and there's quite a few good resonators that we could see potentially come down for 2 will. Things like Windia, setting up something like a Tea Party to be able to go into a really easy Athena or a Hera or something like that. That there is a world where you could go turn 1 as... Aimul, you could go turn 1 Flute into turn 2, based on the stone you hit, into turn 2 Tea Party plus Tea Party activation, recover the Flute, cast a 2-drop, which could be really cool. That could be turn 1 Flute, turn 1.5 Hera, which could be really, really good, especially in this particular matchup. It's a little bit risky because he knows I still have access to contracts, but against other decks that aren't playing as heavy cancels, it's certainly a line that you could take. We don't see anything come out of the Flute, unfortunately. Is thinking about potentially doing Judgment again here, but I think that's probably not the smartest idea, just because of the fact that he would be missing Stone Call, unless he really thinks that there's a Soul Returning Altar right there in the top 3 cards, which seems unlikely. Really kind of hemming and hawing about whether or not to go for the Judgment here. I think getting a second stone is probably the best. I think he's doing a lot of plays during his own turn, which is when Reflect and Refrain also wants to be playing. And so I think in order to kind of have a little bit better shot on this turn, he wants to try to maybe rely on his quick cast stuff a little bit more. Things like Tea Party, any kind of quick cast resonators that might be in the deck, any kind of chance, kind of relying on that kind of stuff. Playing things like, the Dragon of Megiddo, because he's playing a lot of additions, and it does seem like he has those in the deck. Duskell Stone, we looking to get a Horn of the Sacred Beast. This is pretty good because of its ability to pump up Aimul, so she can hit for a little bit harder. Unfortunately, no Darkness Stones. Does look like we have a first boon, Requiem Jewel, to help ramp into some Darkness Will as well, which is a great grab to be able to hit off of an Aimul potentially, but ultimately just not seeing it. Grabbing an extra counter on that magical piggy bank, storing it up for later, and then moving into recovery. Him showing the camera that he's got things that he could have cast here if he had access to red, but his stone's just not doing it for him here. And we do see a Wanderer's Castle come down on my end, just to start generating some magical counters from there, and then a pass. So we're in a pretty similar boat in terms of on the Reflect and Refrain side that we were from game 1. We are at a little bit of a better spot for Patrick in the fact that he has more instant speed will, but it just doesn't seem like he has instant speed cards. Before recovery, he's going to randomly put a +1/+1 counter on the Horn for some reason, and then moves to recovery. So Reflect and Refrain giving Patrick a few opportunities to be able to make some actions, but ultimately just not getting paid off. Trying to do Judgment here because we have the Flute. Going into Aimul, looking at the top 3. our cards look to be. There does look to be a Hera there. I can't imagine that doesn't get grabbed. One of the cards shipping to the bottom is most certainly a sideboard card in the form of Last Days of a Powerless Dragonoid. It's a very good card against Reflect and Refrain to steal all their magic counters and kind of set them back down to 0, especially if they're relying on things like I am in terms of Magical Rabbit or the Phoenix to be able to put in pressure. Do see that Hera come down here. In response to the Hera, we're going to go ahead and get an extra counter, use Dragon of Solari, I can't remember, Dragon of Solari to try to pop my own Wanderer's Castle that's going to get killed here in a second anyway, to get an extra stone, put an extra body on board, hit a 4C stone here. This is still, once again, before Hera resolves. We're going to get some more counters here. Magical Piggy Bank to try to shoot the Hera, get her off board, and do 1,000 damage. Moving those extra +1/+1 counters, or sorry, no, those extra magic counters to Reflect and Refrain, and then trying to go ahead and go for Contract. We're going to Contract for launch of Megiddo. Say, look, you're going to pull this card out of my hand anyway. I might as well do this. And Patrick, playing well into that, goes ahead and has the Last Days of Powerless Dragonoid to say, cool, you can Contract. You're going to have 0 counters. Now, I could choose to just not Contract here, but there's really no point. Contracting is still just going to get me some benefit, and it's instant speed anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Seeing here, I have the Light of Megiddo, the Phoenix, the Magical Rabbit, and Fair Spell. Very easy, quick grab of the Magical Rabbit. It is the best card in my hand there to try to provide some aggression. Light of Megiddo is not bad because it will certainly be able to kill Aimul, but again, I don't really want to kill Aimul, because that gives him more advantage. It's this whole game. If you flipped your J ruler, that's well done. Your flip off of the J ruler wasn't super advantageous. I don't want to give you more opportunities. I want you to sit there on that card, which is probably why we won't see a swing from this Dragon of Megiddo unless there's a way for us to tap down that Aimul without killing her. Young Wizard coming in here to help generate some magic counters back. See, I do have a Phoenix that can get us another one. This one in time, Patrick has full hand knowledge, so really just hoping to see some red or some darkness will to be able to start making some other plays. Something like there's a Hera in hand, right? So another Hera would be very excellent here to start really ripping my hand apart. Reflect and Refrain do not have a lot of draw power, so if you get them down to 0 cards and they don't have Reflect contracted, they're going to just run out of cards. It's just going to happen. We're going to see a pump of Aimul here, but she's most likely going to call stone because we need that additional coloring. Also really unfortunate we just haven't seen any tea parties out of Patrick. Would really make something like that Athena in his hand very, very helpful. Because something like a tea party is probably not going to burn a counter from my Reflect or my Refrain to stop it. So it's probably pretty safe to resolve. We are going in here for a Duet of Light, which makes sense. He's trying to re-grab the Hera back. We're going to go ahead and in response use the Phoenix to try to get an additional counter, go up to 2, and then just burn out all our counters again to stop that Duet of Light from resolving. And we don't want him to have another Hera here. We want to say, look, call stone, hit a Darkness Stone, get Hera, or don't. We do see that stone call come down. Is unfortunately another white blue stone, just really not seeing the cards that the colors that he needs for the cards in his hand, which is a real unfortunate spot for Patrick here. Just again sitting on 3 cards in his hand that he just cannot cast, and the 4th being looks like a Guardian Dragon, which also still can't be cast down because that's not a green source. We are going to see at end of turn, as he moves out of the... So as Patrick decides that he wants to try to move out of the main phase, he still has to pass priority to me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cast Light of Megiddo here. We're going to full send cast it. And the reason why we're doing this is because if it was cast in the main phase, it says must attack this turn if able. Flute can technically attack. So because we haven't left the main phase yet, you can actually force Patrick back into the main phase essentially and have to swing with that Flute to try to kill it. In which point he goes, okay, cool. Well, she has to attack if able, so I'll just use her tap ability to go ahead and put a counter on Aimul. And the main purpose there was to just steal will from Patrick. That card, again, was probably never going to actually kill anything. I'm just never going to use it to try to kill anything because I don't want him to get advantage. But this means that my dragon can swing in for an easy 9 damage and start putting in pressure. I can even swing in with Mover of Worlds here to get another 8 damage. Feel pretty safe about it. Taking Patrick down to 23. And then shooting a past the turn. And you see in my hand, we're down to 2 cards there. We've got a Ferrospell and a Megiddo. Megiddo, again, coming in here for the same kind of reason that the Light of Megiddo did, in the sense of, like, I want ways to be able to push through damage without having you be able to block, or without having to kind of, like, I want your stuff to die in ways that are disadvantageous other than giving you more value. And so we're going to go ahead and see, looks like a Guardian Dragon come down here again. Hoping to see potentially a Stone Call. Really would have liked to have probably called Stone first with that Aimul to be able to hit that stone into play active. So let's see what this Stone Call is here. Really needs to see something that's not. And unfortunately, yeah, just really reversed with the order of what he needed to do there. Should have called Stone first. He would have had a white red source available, which would have put him in a really good spot because he could have cast that Athena. And I don't have any magic counters, so the Athena is just safe, and it says she can't take damage, and it really helps to buy time for Patrick and potentially set him up for some board clears if she can swing the next turn. We're going to see a hard cast of Diversity Alice because nothing else in his hand is castable right now. He doesn't have any quick cast. I think this is a little bit of a misplay. I don't think if you don't have anything quick cast that the argument is to just, well, you don't want to miss out on value, so you're just going to slam things on the board. I think in this particular instance, that's a poor move, mainly because of the fact that he's just signaled to me that I get free reign to do whatever I want. So I can just kind of try to go in, especially you see I have, again, that Light of Megiddo in hand. So we're going to draw in for turn. We know that the dragon is bigger than Megiddo's 800 damage. We know that everything else isn't bigger than Megiddo's damage. And you see there I just top decked into the Reflect contract. So knowing that he's fully tapped out, we're going to go ahead and go for some pressure. We're going to cast the Megiddo here. It's going to do 800 damage to his whole board, killing everything except the dragon, but Megiddo says that anything dealt damage by this card can't block for the turn, and so dragon is essentially knocked out of the running, which is totally fine. And then once again, because we're still in that recovery phase, we are going to do the play we saw before, which is a Rogue Spectator casting into a Memory of Worlds to cancel it, to prevent it from resolving, get ourselves into a Reflect, and then at that point in time we'll be able to swing 2 times with the Dragon of Megiddo without being blocked, as well as 1 time with Mover of Worlds, and that is going to be the lethal. So we're just going to push in here and cycle it out. Patrick recognizing that there's nothing he can do here. That is the match. Hope you guys enjoyed it and kind of saw just a single copy of Mover of Worlds, you know, 1 or 2 copies of Memory of Worlds. Still putting a lot of work with this deck. There's a lot of fun to be played with it. Deck profile with this list will be up later this week. Again, thanks for Patrick for playing, and until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.